Whoops. You can't see the game. All right, how about now? There we go. Okay. So, as requested, I'm going to do some basics. We're going to start this video is going to be HUD symbology. So, looking at the HUD and seeing all the different things about the HUD and what information that provides to me. So, you can look at it and see that information as well. So, while we're on Oscar Mike or on mission, when I say something, you'll understand where I got it from or how I was able to determine that information. So for this particular video, I'm just going to cover the basics. What's on the HUD without any special HUD symbology things. Like if I have my AMRAMs or maybe my sparrows or like all this depends. The HUD symbology changes depending on the mode that you're in. But this is the basic HUD symbology. And what do we see here? So obviously, if you've ever played any flight simulator at all, we're going to start with the pitch ladder. So the yellow crosshairs is my mouse here, and you can see here, this is the horizon line, right? And then you have 5 degrees nose up, and if we go 5 degrees nose down, you can see it's a dash line here. So that's how you know it's nose down versus nose up. All right. Other things we have is our airspeed in knots. And interestingly enough, on the HSI, you can kind of see a little bit more information on that. So 348 knots is our ground speed, where 347 knots is our true airspeed. And things like the wind, I think, is a good example, would cause variations between ground speed and true airspeed. So this says 321, and we're looking here, and it's less than both of those. So this is just kind of a rough estimate, depending on what you need. Usually when I'm trying to figure out how fast I'm going, this is the number I'm looking at. So if I say I'm going 320 knots, this is where I got that information. Over here is our altitude. So we're at 5,000 feet, and this is above sea level. And there's 2 ways to determine your altitude. So right now we're at using barometric pressure. Although I probably didn't set my, what's the word? It's escaping me, altimeter correctly, but it's a rough estimate at this point. So we're at 5,400 feet. If I go nose down at 5,000 feet, by default, at 5,000 feet, we're going to get an alarm that says altitude.
Altitude. Altitude.
Okay, so that alarm there just meant you crossed 5,000 feet. Below 5,000 feet, we can actually use, instead of our altimeter, we can use our radar, and that switches right here. And we can go to radar instead of our barometer. And now we're getting, you see the R next to it shows you that's your air to ground. So we're at 3,000 feet, and just to kind of cycle through them, 3,100 versus 2,700. So obviously the ground is at 300 or so above sea level, right? Interestingly enough, that only works below 5,000 feet. The radar, after 5,000 feet air to ground, it is not able to determine how far off the ground you are. So that, and looks like I'm redlining on my voice, so there, okay. After 5,000 feet, you'll see that R turns into a flashing B, meaning, and if you can't see it, it's right here. If that R turns into a flashing B, that's meaning you're in radar mode, but we're using barometric altitude to determine your altitude. And here in about 400 feet, 300 feet, 200 feet, 100 feet, 500 feet. There we go. So now you see the flashing B. So that tells me I'm in rad alt, or radar altitude, rad alt. But the radar is unable to get a read back from the ground. So I'm giving you instead your barometric. To get rid of the flashing B, we just go into barometric. And that's gone. So that number is the same. It doesn't change depending on the mode that we're in. It's just because the radar is unable to determine that. The number above it is our VSI, vertical speed indicator. So we are climbing at almost 5,000 feet in a minute, and that's increasing. So that's how quickly we're climbing or descending. So if I go nose down, and a little stall there, now we're declining. So we're going towards the ground at 9,000 feet per minute, right? So that's what that number is. So that determines how quickly you're moving vertically in the air. So if we go to the horizon here, that should go to 0 or ish. So pretty close to 0. And try to get to 0. It's hard to do it manually. What we can do is go into autopilot mode and turn our barometric altitude hold right there. And that'll be a little bit more precise. We also have radar altitude hold. The radar altitude hold is obviously below 5,000 feet. You can't do that below 5,000 feet or above 5,000 feet because the radar is unable to determine it. So if we were to try that right now, it should fail. Yep, it won't even let me select it. All right, but we can choose barometric altitude hold. For the other autopilots, we have heading select and attitude hold. That would do your pitch and roll. It'll hold your pitch and roll, and there's probably some boundaries on what it can hold. But if we turn our barometric altitude off, let's do a 5-degree pitch up and maybe 30-degree bank. If I don't hands off the controllers and don't do anything, eventually this will start to slew, and you can kind of see we're not at 30 anymore. It's starting to slew away from 30 degrees, which is right here, which we'll get to in a second. So if I put that back to 30 degrees and back up to 5 degrees pitch up and then hit attitude hold, it should hold that or roughly thereabouts. Okay, so that's a good thing to do when I go into the external views or I'm doing my flybys. Or even if you're trying to find something in on your FLIR or your camera, your IR camera, if you're trying to find something on that, it's good to put yourself in at least a barometric hold so you're not going to crash into the ground. Maybe an attitude hold so you don't veer off accidentally into enemy territory or whatever. So that's really the only time you're going to use your autopilot. Now, heading select, you'll notice on our HSI, horizontal situational indicator, something like that. You got this heading bug right here, and if I turn the heading knob, I can change that left or right, and I can choose that, and that's actually down here where you can see our heading select is at 350 degrees. Let's just make it 270 or west. Okay, so if I turn off autopilot and then zoom out a little bit here, geez. If I go to autopilot and say heading select, it will automatically line up to wherever that heading bug is at here. And we'll get more into the HSI and what have you. So this is supposed to be HUD, but just to give you an idea. So we got our altitude here, our vertical speed indicator here, our airspeed here, and then obviously up here you can probably figure it out. This is our compass, and this caret or circumflex is our current heading. So you can see it's starting to roll out at 270 because that's where we had our autopilot selected. So we're heading at 270 degrees. And then we're going about a 6 degree, 5.5 degree nose up based on the pitch ladder. This circle with the 3 lines on it here is our, I just had the term, velocity vector. This is where the plane is heading. All right. And I'll show you, there's something else I want to show you on this eventually, but I'm going to turn off autopilot and just kind of let the plane do its thing. Because when we get into this symbol here, your alpha is the difference between where your nose is pointing and the direction of the aircraft. So if the aircraft is heading in this direction, you got a 0 degree alpha. But if it's pitched up and heading this direction, it's got a positive alpha. Okay, so if we're nose up and heading this way, we have a positive alpha, and that number is depicted here. So currently that's what's happening. We got about a 4 degree pitch up as we're going like this. So we're plowing through the air. Just, you want a 0 degrees alpha usually. All right, so keep that in mind, and we'll see that here in a second. I'm going to actually drop my gear, even though we're at 20,000 feet in the air and declining rapidly here. Okay, so you can see this W mark here. That is the nose of the aircraft. This is where the aircraft is heading given its current velocity. So I'm actually heading straight towards that. So when you see me line up for a runway, I'm putting my velocity vector on the runway, not where my nose is pointing. I want to head towards the end of the runway, right? So we can see our nose is at 15 degrees down and climbing, just because we're gaining airspeed as we're descending. And as we gain airspeed, the nose is going to want to go up. We're going to have more lift on the wings. But so too is the velocity vector. But you can see the difference between where the nose is pointing and where you're actually heading is this alpha, 3.9 degrees. That's the difference here, which is kind of cool to know. All right, gear up, gas on. And if you notice, more symbology happened when we lowered the gear. We'll get to that in a minute. And actually, whoa. Yeah, I forgot we were going that slow. Hey now. Alright, we'll just go full mill power. I just want to get into a 30-degree bank turn so we're not moving too far away from the airport. So this is a perfect example. If I let go, you can see that drift. So it might be a good time for our attitude hold on our autopilot, which you can tell is on because of the 2 dashes. If I choose the barometric altitude hold, you see the 2 dashes there. So we're in attitude and barometric altitude. So we're just going to sit here and circle indefinitely or until we run out of fuel. All right, so moving on, this is our current Mach speed. So we're at 360 knots or 0.68 Mach. Obviously Mach 1 being the speed of sound. So if we exceed Mach 1, which we will do here shortly because I'm at full military power here, we'll be breaking the sound barrier. The G is how many Gs we're currently feeling. When you feel comfortable, like you're sitting in your office playing a video game, that's 1 G. So we're a little over 1 G, not a big deal. The max that we've felt while on this flight is 5.2 Gs. So, okay, we're going about almost Mach 1. I'm going to disengage autopilot, and I'm going to pull some Gs here. So we're at 6 Gs, 6.3, 4, and there's a G limiter on. We're going to break that. We're at 7 G, and now we're stalled. But you get the idea there. I'm going to turn that back on. G limiter back on. So the plane does have a G limiter that prevents you from over G'ing the plane, which you can turn off if you need to in emergency situations. And let's we're gonna have to turn on our afterburners here because we're only going 180 knots. Good cruising speed is about 300 knots, 350, somewhere in there. All right, notching the afterburner. Okay, so back to holding position here. We'll get our 30-degree bank, turn on our attitude hold and barometric hold. All right, so now we'll just circle around indefinitely while we go through the rest of this. So again, we're at 1.2 Gs. The max that we just did was 7.2 Gs. This is the current time in Zulu time, or GMT, the time in England, basically. So it's 0400 hours and 22 minutes and 25 seconds and increasing. Now we can make the local offset on that to get local time, but usually in military operations we're always going to run off of Zulu time. So we'll just leave that on there. We can turn that off so it's not on the HUD by going here and selecting Z time of day. Okay, so now the time is not there. That comes in play when you're doing missions like we just did, where you need to be at a certain waypoint at a certain time. Then over on the bottom here, you could probably figure this out by now. This is our roll angle. So right here at this dash right here is 0 degrees. We got 5 degrees at this dash and this dash, 15 degrees at this dash and this dash, and then 30 degrees at this dash and this dash. And then you can see this dash over here, and that dash over there is 45 degrees. So if we just disable autopilot, I can bring it to 45 here. And now we're at a 45 degree bank, which obviously increases our turning radius. Also decreasing our lift. So we got to pull back on the stick. You can see me pulling back on the stick on, and I can't let go. Actually, I can try. Over here is my indicators. If I turn autopilot off, I'm going to pull back on the stick. You can see me pulling back on the stick to maintain altitude. Right, and the greater the bank angle, the more you got to pull back on the stick. So if we move to a 30 degree bank angle to maintain altitude, I'm barely pulling back on the stick. I don't even know if that's registering. Oh, okay, I guess I need to pull back a little bit more, right? And then if we go to a 15 degree bank angle, we got that, and my hands are off, right? And then obviously 5 and 0 is basically the same. Now we do have trim in this aircraft, but this aircraft has auto trim features. So the aircraft trims itself, except when the landing gear is down, you want to trim your own aircraft. That's the only time I'm actually hitting the trim wheel, which is on my joystick. And then the only other thing on the HUD that we got to cover is this ATC, auto throttle control. So my hands are off the throttle and I'm maintaining about the speed that I set it at. It's not exacting, but it's pretty close to exacting. It tries to maintain that speed. Think of it like cruise control. So I still, if like I have to brake, speed up or slow down, just like in your car, you have to turn off your cruise control and adjust the speed, and then you can reset that. So I'll turn it off, and then it'll be blinking because it's off. I'll go full mil power, and you can start to see I'm increasing here. We'll get to 400. Auto throttle on, and you'll see that this automatically adjusts. So this over here, excuse me, this over here is my throttle lever. So if I disable autopilot and nose down, you can see the throttle's decreasing to maintain 400 knots. If I nose down a lot, I'm at idle and I'm increasing speed. So obviously the auto throttle has its limits, right? So if I come back to the horizon here, you'll see now it's auto throttling to try to get back to 400 knots. Okay, so that's just ATC is auto throttle. So that's basically it for HUD symbology. Minus, obviously, there's a lot more that comes into the HUD at different times during different things. You know, you activate TACAN or waypoint navigation, or you're in air-to-air mode or air-to-ground mode. You're shooting missiles or bombs or whatever. Or you're coming in for a landing and your gear is down, which will probably be the next video I do, but you get the idea. So that's just the basic HUD symbology to give you an idea what's going on in the HUD itself. So with that, I'll stop recording, start a new video for general navigation.